Good morning. If everyone could take their seats, we're going to go ahead and get started. I am Kevin Greiner. I am President and CEO of Gas South, and I am also serving as the chair of the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education for the 2015 and 2016 years. And on behalf of everyone at the Georgia Partnership, welcome to the Critical Issues Forum. I'd first like to recognize Comcast for its generous support of today's event, in particular Andy Mackey and Victoria Brasi. They could not be here today, but I would like to recognize them. Let's give them a hand in absentia. And I also want to thank Georgia Pacific for hosting us in this great facility. We really appreciate their generosity and hospitality. Thank you, Georgia Pacific. So today we're going to be focusing on the changing demographics of Georgia's children and the opportunities and challenges that this presents for our public education institutions. And never before has demographic change shifted so profoundly for our nation and indeed for our state. And consider the following. Projections forecast a 46% increase in Georgia's population from 2010 to 2030. And we're becoming increasingly diverse. In fact, in Georgia, our overall public school population now is majority minority. We're also becoming increasingly poor. The number of public school children in Georgia eligible for free and reduced meals has increased from 59% to 62% in just 3 years. And many of these students are living below the poverty line. We also have the fourth highest poverty rate in the nation. And not surprisingly, the fastest growing student populations in our public school systems are those in poverty and limited English proficient, and they are the least likely to graduate. The average four-year graduation rate in 2014 for all Georgia public school students was 73%. That compares with 63% for low-income students and only 44% for English language learners. So these demographic shifts in our schools, coupled with the workforce exodus of baby boomers and a growing mismatch between the skills that employees are looking for and the talent available, present a conundrum for our future economic viability. And that's why this becomes a very important business issue as well as a social issue. And our schools from K-12 all the way up to higher education are at the epicenter of this new demographic era as their students mirror the growing racial and ethnic diversity of our overall population. And if these demographic groups that are growing so quickly are not moving up the education ladder, Georgia's economic growth, along with the earning power of our residents, will stall. And that'll cause us to fall behind unless we do a better job of raising the educational level of all racial and ethnic and income groups. So I hope you are looking forward to a very robust and interesting, thought-provoking forum today. And at this time, I would like to introduce Steve Dolinger, the president of the Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education, to provide you with some updates on the organization and to introduce our moderator for today. Steve.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. A lot going on with the partnership. This is a really, really important forum. We don't call them critical issue forum for nothing, but this one really has some impact on us, not just in the metro area, but across our state. You're going to hear some similar themes that could really be replicated in many of our states across the country. Let me take just a minute to do a typical run through the packet that you have there so you'll understand some of the information we provide you. Of course, the agenda, I'll come back to that in just a minute. And then a sheet thanking Comcast. Kevin mentioned their support. We really are thrilled to have them to support these kinds of programs so we can bring them to you and let you then be more informed and if possible, advocates for the changes we need in Georgia. Then we have the bios of our speakers. You know we don't spend a lot of time during the program to go through these, so you can read those and see the strong backgrounds of the folks that we bring you. But as I introduce them briefly by name, you'll know who they are as you look through this. And then the people who are registered to attend today. I heard some of you saying that there was challenges in parking, that you're going to the top of the deck here, so I think people may still be circling around looking for the parking. But you can see that this drove a whole lot of interest to bring a lot of people to this session today. So that's there for your information. People say they like to come to these, as we will give you a SurveyMonkey opportunity to give us feedback later on when you get back to your offices. But we get feedback that people like the content, but they also like the networking. So you can see some folks who are here, so before they leave, perhaps you can snag someone you've been trying to corral lately. On the other side, several pieces of information there. One I'm really proud of is the REACHES report. We just finished this program. It was supported by the Guazetta Foundation, Research Engagement in Communities of Hispanic Latino Educated Students. You know that we have been doing some community engagement and strategic planning work for years across the state in various communities. The Guazetta Foundation realized that was having an impact in some of our communities and worked with us in partnership to identify 2 communities that have a lot of Latino kids. So we worked in Tatnall County down in South Georgia and Calhoun City in Gordon County up north. And this is the impact. We really are focused on the research and the data. So metrics are important for us. When you read through this, I think you'll be impressed also. And there are some other programs that came out of this, some of those that you don't really expect. We wanted to help these communities and help that early part of the pipeline, particularly with the Latino kids, but realizing if we're helping those kids, we're helping all kids. But in Calhoun City, for example, and you'll read in here, where we came up with a program for kids in early care and pre-K, and our Department of Early Care and Learning picked up on that and now is deploying that across the state of Georgia. So wonderful things that we can find that we can really replicate then to other places across the state. The blue sheet is our new 2015-2016 class of our Education Policy Fellows. This is our 8th class. So we have now all those cohorts of class members that are helping us with education work. Would our new fellows and our alumni please stand and let's give them a welcome and round of applause. It's really exciting as we go to meetings, no matter what organization, private, public, associations, businesses, that are having some focus on education policy, we'll have some fellows there. And that's what it's all about, to be able to keep that kind of conversation going. Our sponsors for that are Lockheed Martin and Wells Fargo. We really appreciate their support for that program. And then in our media, Bill Maddox, our communication director, just keeps winding us up. We have a lot of our media friends we've invited today. With our media symposium every January, when we roll out our top 10 issues to watch, we'll get 30, 35 reporters from across the state and build that relationship where we like to work with them. Just yesterday, Dana Rickman and I were on the phone with a reporter and going through some ideas, not necessarily to be quoted, but to help understand some of the policy issues because they can be quite complicated. But one of our opportunities is every time the James Magazine comes out, and this is the most current edition, they usually ask us to put an article in there. There are copies in your folder of 2 of the most recent ones. The one in this edition is by Laura Margaret Burbach, who was an intern with us this summer. She's a Georgia Tech rising senior. Really good article, Wake Up Call for the American Dream. Similar to our conversation today. Laura Margaret did the research on this and did such a good job, we let her put her name to it. The other one is from our Vice President, Diane Hopkins. A great partnership we've had for several years with the Board of Regents, getting funding from a federal grant that they had that we would then turn around and give small grants to chambers across the state to really engage their students in making sure they're going on to college. And the focus was primarily for students who may be attending for the first time, which focused on mostly kids in poverty and kids who speak English as a second language. But some really good stories there, and this gives you just a little bit of that information, but that's been a great strategy for some of our chambers. Have really had some creative ideas. And then if you want to be on our distribution list to get this information that comes out, announcements for these kinds of meetings, and our policy blasts, you can fill this out and leave it on the table on your way out, and we'll put you on that list. And then finally, the last piece there is an envelope. And as most nonprofits, my friends in this room do this also, we would love to have your support and funding to enable us to keep doing the kinds of things that we're doing. So that's there for you to take advantage of if you'd like. Just to give you a last-minute piece that I just got an email from yesterday evening, and this goes back to the reflection of thanking our partners for their support to let us do this work, and our strong team, we have been nominated by a national organization, the Policy Innovators in Education Network, for one of their national awards in leading policy. You'll remember that a year or so ago, our board challenged us to be more bold. And once we had a good conversation about what that means, how we would behave, it really meant that we would continue to put the light on issues like we do with our top 10 issues to watch, but perhaps put more heat on certain issues as the data and the research might indicate. So it's that balance of light versus heat. So in that work, you remember we started the Coalition for Better Schools, Better Standards, Better Schools in Georgia when we were fighting for the high standards. The Georgia Chamber helped us with that, and many of you are members of that coalition. Well, we were wondering if that coalition would have life with other policy issues. The good news is that it did. So let me read. This is the nomination that is going forward. Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education, defending and improving the use of student data. The Georgia Partnership for Excellence in Education successfully prevented legislation that would have made it impossible for parents, teachers, and policymakers to use data to drive student achievement. Furthermore, GPEE also led a coalition of business and education groups in passing the nation's first comprehensive student data privacy law, based on the Foundation for Excellence in Education's model legislation developed in partnership with the Data Quality Campaign. The new law both safeguards student data and ensures appropriate use and is now being considered in several states. How about a hand for our little team? Okay, moving into the program. By the way, this program is being videotaped, and it should be up on our website, if not by Friday, by the 1st of next week. So if you have colleagues who couldn't be here, they'd like to watch this, they can certainly do that. It might be even more comfortable to have a little popcorn and a beverage and do that at home, rather than have to drive downtown and look for parking. Okay, the program. You can see the program. You heard our chair talk about why this is an important issue. We're going to tee it up first with Craig Lesser to give us a little bit of that big view. You can read Craig's bio, but the reason we wanted Craig here, and I want to explain to you, why did we bring the people together that we have? It was very purposeful. Craig is chairing the Atlanta Regional Commission's Competitiveness Task Force. There are 4 subcommittees under that, but looking at the counties in the metro area and attacking these kinds of issues and looking for solutions. So he, among a lot of people, he is one of the best who knows what this means for education and our workforce pipeline. Then it's like, okay, let's really look at the data. You know, we love data. So we have Mike Carnathan from the Atlanta Regional Commission. He's doing a lot of work on Neighborhood Nexus and some really interesting data pieces. So he will share that with us so we can really see what the data is telling us. But you know, we always get into the so what. So what are we going to do about this? Well, we have some people who can help answer that question. We have Phil Lanoue, who is the superintendent in Clarke County. He's also the state superintendent of the year, and he's also the national superintendent of the year. And he's won those recognitions because they're doing some pretty cool things in Clarke County. You'll hear about that in a few minutes. We have Art Dunning, who some of you may remember was the first president of the Georgia Partnership. He's been at UGA, he's been a chancellor in Alabama, and now he is the president of Albany State College. They're doing some really interesting things in that part of the state. We like to look at what's happening across Georgia because there's some really good solutions that are right here in our backyard. So Dr. Dunning will share some of that. And then Laurie Murrah-Hanson is with the Great Promise Partnership. And many of you have been to or heard about the program that's down in Newton County, what Southwire has created down there, the 12 for Life program. Well, a lot of organizations, a lot of communities don't have a Southwire, but they have some solutions and strategies. And Laurie can share with you some of those that are actually partnering with in Clarke County, but others across our state that where businesses coming together and they're answering the so what. They're really focusing on helping kids get through that pipeline. So that's why we have the people here today, to help with that kind of information. So we're going to have opportunities for Q&A, so be thinking about what kind of questions you'd have and what you'd like to ask them. So let's go ahead and start. We'll have our leadoff hitter, Craig Lesser. Please come up. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you, Steve. Thank you for the kind invitation to be here today. It's always good to be in the Georgia Pacific building, where you know that there will always be high-quality paper towels in the restroom. In my few minutes, I want to talk about some elements of what we're witnessing in terms of economic development in this state and how it relates to education. And I just want to tell you, as it relates to the Atlanta Regional Commission Competitiveness Initiative, we do have 4 committees that are working very hard, and the Education Workforce Preparedness Committee is run by the most amazing person I know, and that's Ann Kramer, who is doing her usual brilliant job. And we need to thank her for what she does. So just briefly, you know, the 3 most, on any given day from a business perspective, the 3 most important business drivers in the state of this economy, and I think you all know what they are, on any given day. And that's not to exclude some of the others that are contributors on a regular basis, but the 3 most important ones that are cited are our ports down in Savannah, Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, and our system of higher education, both public and private in our state. That's the attraction. On any given day, any announcement that's made is probably going to reference at least one of those 3, as well as others, lifestyle, our workforce in many instances, and other issues. But those are the 3 main drivers. What do our politicians mostly talk about at the state level, with some exception? And some of those folks are in the room today, I know. Water, transportation, and education. And in the midst, I think we're in the midst of, at some point, resolving the water situation. Transportation, this one is always interesting for me. Yes, we have congestion. Some of us were a little bit late arriving here today because of traffic. Have you been to London? Have you been to Beijing? Have you been to Chicago? Have you been to Charlotte? Everybody in a viable, dynamic economy has congestion. The single most positive aspect of our overall transportation issue is what I referenced a moment ago in Metro Atlanta, and for the state to a large extent. And that's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. Think about it. The major global cities of the world historically developed because of water transportation. But in the 21st century, even in the latter part of the 20th century, air transportation for both cargo and movement of people has become equally, in many instances, more significant than water transportation. So we've got that one nailed. Do we have our local congestion issues resolved? No, and I've got a grief here, because I'll tell you that 10 years ago, a certain element of our business community touted to the rest of the world that congestion and traffic was the biggest problem we have in Metro Atlanta. And we went out and told the world that, and 2.5 years ago, we had a T-SPLOST, which we did not pass, and we then said to the rest of the world, not only do we have a traffic problem, but we really don't care. Great message for the rest of the world. I found it interesting. I know some of you, in addition to reading our local newspapers and online, sometimes, occasionally read the New York Times. I do. And I was very interested. There's a community out in California that is attracting a lot of investment. It attracts a lot of talent from all around the world, smart people. It's the San Francisco Bay Area. And I thought it was interesting, the headline in the New York Times a week ago Sunday, Bay Area's disjointed public transit network inspires a call for harmony. Might we have had some similar headline here? But are people not going to San Francisco because they think there's traffic there? I dare say no. So we've been marketing our state and our region for some time as a great place to do business, a great place to live, and a great place to play. But headlines around the world about congestion and headlines around the world about corruption in our schools, in multiple school districts, along with low standardized test scores and especially low dropout rates, have not helped us one bit. These things are not unnoticed by prospective investors. Are we really matching the job vacancies that exist within the necessary education that we have to have here in our state? There are jobs going empty in our state. The Metro Chamber, with the involvement of many of you, has embarked on a massive initiative to keep talented people here and recruit more to our region. But that isn't going to be enough. We have the global transportation link. We have the geographic location. It's not enough. All of these are vehicles for massive growth. Massive growth. But do we have the human resources to fulfill that potential? In order to grow our economy, we've got to demand that students stay in school and get their high school diplomas. We must demand that middle and high schoolers be given information about choices in life, about learning to be leaders, about learning a skill or a trade. But we mustn't, in my view, tell every child they must go to college. Education beyond high school, you bet. Absolutely. But for a purpose. Learning a trade for one student is just as important as learning the Einstein theories for another. The most important lesson I learned in business school was that it's not either or, it's and also. And by the way, across the state, as we assist local communities, how many of you are on school boards? Any of you? And how many of you are either mayors or county commissioners? Well, and I'm really going to speak freely. I have a business partner, the former mayor of Decatur, Bill Floyd. And he really taught me a lot about the intersection of elected municipal government and elected school boards. And Mr. Greiner talked a little bit about some of the needs that some of our students have. They come to school hungry. Well, a school board isn't necessarily going to be able to resolve that problem. And what we teach local officials in our economic development work is that you as a mayor, you as a county commissioner, you as a local elected official have a responsibility to work with your school board. And you school board members have an opportunity and a responsibility to work with your other elected officials. We run into so many elected officials that say, well, that's not my issue. That's the school board's issue. And that's really wrong, and that's going to be the reason those communities remain in default, because they're not working together. If a child comes to school hungry, he or she will not learn. And the school board isn't necessarily going to have the resources to take care of that, but the rest of the community has to have that responsibility. So much for that. But it's a passion. It's important. So, what is that phone in your pocket called? It's called a smartphone, right? Smart. Everybody get that? Smartphone. Smart's important whether one is a corporate manager, a plumber, a baker, or a public safety officer. So let's teach our kids how to think, how to learn a skill, and most important, let's teach them how to communicate. Because our kids aren't communicating. Oh, they're doing this stuff. But that's not communicating in the real world. We have a huge and varied economy depending and demanding people who can do things at different levels. It's not transportation. It's not water. What will drive our economy is smart. Smart young people, smart old people, but smart is what it's all about. So today you're going to learn a lot from people a whole lot smarter than me about the changing demographics and have a great discussion. And I want to thank you for the work you do, Steve, your team, Kevin, your leadership, and all of you for paying attention to our education in our state. But the education piece is the single most important thing we can work on. We can have a lot of roads, but without great education, we will fail. Thank you.
Every year I'm invited back to work with the Regional Leadership Institute, the class from the Atlanta Regional Commission every year, their leadership class. And they do a survey of those 50, 60-some class members every year, and typically, once again, the top 3 issues they talk about are just what Craig's talking about: transportation, water, and education. Education is a big issue for us to try to fix. So what? So who's going to work on that? Who's going to fix it? We'll get to that in a minute, but let's paint that picture just a little bit more clearly about what the data is telling us. You've heard several of us talk about the data, but let's have Mike Carnathan come up now and give us the big picture. Mike?
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Good morning. Morning. How are you? Excellent, excellent, excellent. So again, my name is Mike Carnathan. I'm a researcher with the Atlanta Regional Commission, and part of that is I head up a program called Neighborhood Nexus. And what Neighborhood Nexus is, it's a community intelligence system that literally has thousands of data points from different levels of geography, from the neighborhood all the way to the metro area, and across a wide range of different topics. And so that's why I'm here today. So Steve and Dana know if they invite me to things, I'm going to bring a big bucket of data. And that's what I'm going to show you today. And so data is obviously I'm very passionate about data. Well, in particular, I'm passionate about telling the story with data. To provide that context. That's what storytelling means, is you provide that context. The data by itself is just data. You need to provide that context to turn it into something that you can take action on. And so I'm involved in many public education focused circles. And so when I start telling stories with data, providing that context, yes, I talk a little bit about what's happening inside the school. Things like graduation rates, test scores. We need to track those. But what I mostly talk about is the context that the kids bring with them into the classroom. Because that has a very, very strong relationship with how the kids do inside the classroom. I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys know this. But, like income, for example, was one of the strongest predictors of student success. Family stability, housing stability is one of the strongest predictors of attendance, which in turn is one of the strongest predictors of student success. So that's the story. So the story that I'm going to be telling today is providing that context just through the demographics and the demographic changes that we're seeing in the Georgia and the Atlanta region as a whole. And so, yes, I'm passionate about data, but I'm also passionate about education. My mother got her doctorate degree in education, and she was a teacher, principal, and assistant superintendent for 40 years. My dad also got his doctorate in education, math ed in particular, so he trained math teachers and wrote textbooks. My sister is a teacher, and she actually won Teacher of the Year last year at Etowah High School in Cherokee County. And my wife is a French teacher in APS. And I just realized I probably should have put my wife first. So if y'all see her, don't mention this. So I'm very passionate, and it's great to be in front of an audience where I can sort of, have dovetailing passions to talk about data and the context it provides in terms of public education. So I'm going to walk through my big bucket of data, provide that context, But the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to make it easy on you guys. Now, I know the football season's coming up. This is not a reference to football. This is SEC country. We don't talk about mid-major conferences. All right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of give you the 10 big takeaways from this presentation. Now, remember, the story that I'm focusing on, and I could be up here in front of you guys for hours talking about this aspect, talking about the suburbanization of poverty, income inequality, all these big challenges we have. What I'm going to be focusing on is really the changing faces and the changing fortunes of Georgia and the Atlanta region. And so here's some of the big key takeaways. And you guys know this. You drive around, you see. We're a fast-growing state in a fast-growing metropolitan area. We're growing older. Kevin mentioned that earlier about the baby boomers aging out, but we're actually going to stay young. We have a nice little kind of cycle of life going on here in Metro Atlanta and Georgia as a whole. We're growing more diverse, but this is really concentrated in the younger cohorts, and we're going to talk about that. The job market is recovering, incomes are not. And the economy is going to reflect these changing demographics. So for example, we're all growing older, that big baby boom cohort is aging. There's going to be a lot more jobs in the healthcare sector. That's what that means. New economy jobs are hot. But these new economy jobs overwhelmingly require at least a bachelor's degree. But old economy jobs are hot too. And these are the opportunities that if we can align training with, some sort of training track with these jobs, there's lots of opportunities for folks out there who don't have a college degree. But regardless of that, the education gap, the gap between, the skills required and the education we have is pretty big. And that's a real challenge we're going to have moving forward. And then finally, socioeconomics matters. I've said this a gazillion times in my life, and I'm probably going to say that a gazillion times today. Okay, so these are the things that I'm going to be talking about. So I'm going to jump right into it, into population trends. Now, one of the big things that we've seen, and this is really spanning back like 220 years or so, but the big global things that kind of cast a shadow on everything is the fact that, number one, we're having fewer kids. Number two, we're living longer. And so what this is going to show you is, this is 1800. I'm actually going to play a video that's going to take you through 214 years of this stuff. This is the United States in 1800, showing you that the average woman had about 7 children, and the life expectancy was around 39 years of age. Now what's going to happen is as we progress forward, everything's going to move to, up and to your right, meaning people are having fewer kids and we're living longer. So let's just take a look at how this plays out here. All right. So you'll see we have China and the United States covered, and you'll see even beginning in 1800, people started having fewer kids, but the longevity wasn't changing. And here comes the Civil War. Whoop. There goes longevity. You'll see that that we're still, okay, now we're beginning to see some gains with longevity as the Industrial Revolution happens. Here comes World War I, Spanish influenza. And now you're seeing we're having fewer kids. Oh, baby boom. And baby boom's over. Fewer kids, living longer, fewer kids, living longer, fewer kids, living longer. Fewer kids living longer, and there we are. And so now we've got to, thank you. And so now we're at the longevity, average life expectancy is about 79, and women are having fewer than 2 kids. That's less than replacement level. So so just keep in mind that, so this is the kind of the global, kind of things that cast a shadow over everything. Now, looking at Georgia, Georgia is a fast-growing state. It's actually grown twice as fast as the nation as a whole since 1990, and we've kept up those gains in recent years. Overall, Georgia is about the 9th largest state. It might have moved up to 8th, I'm not sure. But since 1990, we've actually had the 4th most new residents, behind Texas, California, and Florida. So, we're adding a lot of people. And then the metro area, see, just in case you didn't know where it was, a little area there. The blue dots represent the most growth in the nation, and Metro Atlanta is part of that. We're actually ranked 7th since 2010, and this is after a decade where we were one of 3 metropolitan areas to add more than 1 million people. So yes, we're not growing quite as fast, but we're still one of the big boys when it comes to growth. And then if you look inside metropolitan Atlanta, and this is for you people in the audience from metropolitan Atlanta, the dark blues represent the highest growth. You'll see most of the growth is occurring in the second ring suburbs over the past decade. And the reds and the oranges represent loss of population. And you see that loss of population is really kind of focused in the first ring suburbs. Now this plays into this suburbanization of poverty that we've seen kind of play out here in metropolitan Atlanta. Those first ring suburbs kind of got vacated, kind of got forgotten, no reinvestment. That's where the affordable housing ended up being. People moved there, then the Great Recession happened, and boom, all of a sudden you're in a place that's not used to having high levels of poverty. And then if we look at the state as a whole, county by county, where are we forecasting, and that's not we, it's Woods and Pool, is it forecasted that the most people are going to go? And you'll see it's mostly in metropolitan areas. So the blues through the reds represent significant growth between now and 2040. And so you see Metro Atlanta, but then you see other metropolitan areas too, up near Chattanooga, Columbus, Augusta, Savannah, even around Albany. The metropolitan areas are going to capture the majority of the population and the majority of the jobs. That's just the nature of the game. It's in a metropolitan world now. So now let's shift a little bit to the age. Georgia's younger than the nation as a whole, so we have a slightly higher percentage of school-age children, slightly lower percentage of older adults. Metropolitan Atlanta, again, is one of the youngest metros in the nation. This blue represents the highest concentrations of those under 20. And you'll see really metropolitan Atlanta in the southeast context is really one of the youngest in the nation. I mean, really one of the youngest in the southeast. And again, moving to how this is kind of playing out in Georgia, the darker colors represent higher rates of 65 and older. The lighter colors mean lower rates. And you'll see metropolitan Atlanta kind of stands out as an island. We really don't have a lot of that 65 and older population here. So, I mean, when I say it's relatively young, we're not as old as the rest of Georgia. Now, looking at the other end of the age spectrum, this is the percent under 5, and you'll see the heaviest concentration of these kids are in suburban Atlanta, but particularly in counties with great diversity. Places like Gwinnett, places like Hall, like Dalton and Whitfield, some of the southern Georgia counties. This is getting back to that, how the age and the race sort of interplay, and I'm going to talk a lot more about that in a little bit. So now what I want to do is kind of just walk you through, again, 50 years of kind of how the age composition is working. So here we're looking at 1990. This is both the nation and the Atlanta region. Nation is the blue, Atlanta region is the orange. And so in 1990, see these orange bars stretching out here, metropolitan Atlanta was a very boomer place. So this is when the baby boomers were aging into the workforce, and this is really their prime working years. And metropolitan Atlanta has always been able to capture those working age people. And so this is what it is in 1990. Here's Gen X. And this is when the millennials were first born. Okay, so let's see what it looks like in 2015. So you'll see there's the silent generation, greatest generation up there. Here's the baby boomer generation. And now, in 1990, metropolitan Atlanta was a heavy boomer place. Today it's not. Because again, metropolitan Atlanta attracts people who need jobs. And the baby boomers are beginning to age out of that cohort. So here's the Gen X. So now this is the prime working age. And you'll see that metropolitan Atlanta is a very heavy Gen X place. You'll see the millennials. We're kind of, average with them. And then you'll see this other cohort down here. We don't have a name for them yet. Somebody clever will come up with them as soon as they buy their first little widget. But you'll see that we're also a very heavy Gen Z place. So what does that mean? Well, let's fast forward to 2040. You'll see the baby boomers are still hanging on up there. Gen Xers are still hanging on up there, but we're no longer a dominant force in metropolitan Atlanta. There's your millennials, especially the young millennials, and there's your Gen Z. So the folks that you're looking at, little kids walking around with little backpacks, they're going to be running this place in 2040. And then we have, even yet another generation that isn't even born yet, and you'll see how that's that life cycle of metropolitan Atlanta, how it just keeps generating younger people. So yes, we are aging, but we're going to stay relatively young. Now I'm going to shift focus to race and ethnicity. And so metropolitan Atlanta added more black population than any other metro by far. We are one of 3 metropolitan areas to add more than 1 million people total over the past decade, along with Dallas and Houston. And if you look at kind of the structure of race and ethnicity, so here's Atlanta here. The big blue bar is white population. We love to confuse people with colors. You're going to see many different colors. Just stay with me here. So the blue bar equals the white population. All the other bars equal the non-white population. So you see actually metropolitan Atlanta is majority minority. Whatever that means. That's a terrible term that doesn't make any sense. But you'll see that we have more non-white population than we have white population. And that's the trends. That's where we're moving from. We're not moving towards this Boston or Philadelphia profile. We're actually moving somewhere between the Washington and the Houston profile. Right? So again, looking at Georgia and how the race is distributed in Georgia, North Georgia is older and whiter. And you'll see how that's there. And then in terms of the black population, metropolitan Atlanta and southwest Georgia has the heaviest concentrations. Now in metropolitan Atlanta, what's very, very interesting is we're a segregated place. And so you'll see the concentrations of the white population, again in dark blues, really kind of about the exurban fringes. And then the reds mean, absence of white. And then now we're going to fast forward to where the black population lives. We're going to do this a couple of times. Kind of like mirror images there, right? And so it's this segregation that really has a big effect on school systems. Because we know race and income are all conflated, and it all comes back to family stability, housing stability, and all of these things affect what happens inside the classroom. So the Hispanic populations, this is how it looks statewide. Metro Atlanta does have some of the heaviest Hispanic concentrations, but they're really kind of in the suburbs of Metro Atlanta. They're not really they haven't really flocked to the urban core yet. And you also see a lot down in the South Georgia. And then this is how they are scattered throughout metropolitan Atlanta. Now, if I would have showed you an age map, and I just didn't want to bore you with too many maps, what you would have seen, so again, this is the blues. What you would have seen is these pockets in Marietta, pockets in Canton, this Norcross, Buford Highway, Gainesville. I could put up the same map showing you where the concentration of 5-year-olds are, and it will look exactly the same. Because again, to reinforce this point one more time, it's the interplay between the race and the age, whereas you see the younger cohorts are way more diverse than the older cohorts. And so within metropolitan Atlanta, well, actually this is within the 20-county region, there are actually now more millennials in raw numbers than there are baby boomers. Okay? We've seen this trend coming for a while. But they're really way more diverse than the baby boomers. And as we keep aging through, as Gen Z starts maturing, as Gen whatever after Z matures, this is the trend that we're going to see. This is white populations, diverse populations. You'll see the 0 to 14, 60% of them in metropolitan Atlanta are non-white. And you'll see as we keep aging, that profile changes to where, the 70 plus, the Eisenhowers of the silent generations are majority white. And that's where we're moving. And this is felt particularly strong in school systems. So now we're looking at school enrollment. I just chose some local school districts in the Atlanta region. This is as of 2000. And again, that blue bar represents the white population. 9 of the 14 school systems had a majority white population in 2000. Fast forward to 2014, now only 5 do. And this is just in 14 years. This isn't even a generation yet. This is how fast things have been happening in our school system. So we'll go back, like Rockdale, for example, it was 68% white in 2000. Today it's 17. And this is just in 14 years. So this is just the pace of change that our school systems are having to deal with, and it's dizzying. This is public school. Yeah, this is districts. And so, again, when I say the region is becoming more diverse, we're only going to become, in 1990, we're a bi-ethnic place, right? White, majority white, black, not much else. By 2040, really just going to have a plurality of races. It's going to be a marble cake. It's just going to have equal numbers of all races. And actually, by 2040, we probably won't even have these labels anymore. They're going to be something different. So now, let me focus on some socioeconomic trends and how, and again, think about the global shifts in demographics and where we're moving to and how this is going to affect the economy. So again, the job market is recovering in Georgia. This is last year. We grew by 2.8%, which is higher than the nation as a whole, and the second highest of the southeastern states. Metropolitan Atlanta, too, has been outperforming the nation in terms of job growth for about 2 years now. I mean, the Great Recession really lasted a long time here, but since that point, we've really recovered nicely in terms of jobs. And again, this is that blue represents the most job growth, and you'll see how Metropolitan Atlanta kind of dominates that southeastern landscape here. Just in case you know where it was. Now, Georgia's per capita income, and I did adjust for inflation because that's what I do, is lower today than it was in 2000. And you'll look at what's happened in the nation, right? So the nation, it went through the Great Recession and it's recovered. Georgia just isn't there yet. So what's happening? And so a lot of what Kevin was talking about, yes, we're growing a lot, but we're also growing poor. And this is really reflected in the numbers. And so now we're going to shift our focus to job postings. Now this is different than jobs. This is what employers are looking for. So they post a job, say, hey, I need a software developer. Okay, let's post a position. So we're able to pull that and look at the actual posting. So this is demand. This is what employers are looking for. And you see on a per capita basis, Georgia ranks 20th, which, it's middle of the pack. It's not the bottom, but it is middle of the pack. And I think we should aspire to more than that. Now, the type of occupations, remember at the very beginning, I was talking about new economy jobs are hot, but so are old economy jobs. This is of the last 12 months, every single job posting that occurred in Georgia, the most sought after occupation is truck drivers. Second most, software developers. Now in Metro Atlanta, that actually flips. Metro Atlanta, they're really looking for more software developers. And you see registered nurses, that's that kind of that healthcare demand that we're seeing. We still need retail salespersons. And you just look up and down this list, you'll see some computer systems analysts, maintenance repair. It's a real mixture of new economy and old economy jobs. We just have to find that right balance, that right kind of alignment to get kids into these jobs. Now, one of the global trends, and again, Kevin mentioned this before. I should have just not even come up here and let Kevin handle the whole thing. The boomers are aging out of the workforce, and so what that means is today the labor force participation rate, these are the people who, like it says, are participating in the labor force, 66% today by 2040, that's going to be 58.6%, which is, we don't really even know how to handle that because it's never been that low. But the big numbers, what ARC is seeing for the Atlanta region at least, is 7.9 million people by 2040. That is an increase of 2.7 million people from today forward. That's a lot. It's a lot of people. If you want to imagine what kind of that 8 million people look like, imagine kind of a slightly smaller Chicago today. That's where we're kind of moving to. We're going to be adding about 1.6 million new jobs. And this is how it's really going to kind of look. So in 1990, talk about the old economy stuff, retail, trade, and manufacturing were the two biggest sectors. Now fast forward to 2015, this is how the job growth, that orange bar is the job growth in these sectors. You'll see healthcare has really caught up a lot of ground. Now retail trade is still the biggest sector, but things like professional scientific services, those are the software developer jobs. You'll see that they're really catching up ground. And then by 2040, healthcare will be the dominant sector, right? So this is that kind of that changing demographics are being reflected in the employment and the overall economy. And where the jobs are going to go in Georgia, well, again, metropolitan America wins in terms of job creation. So what? I've been droning on and on about numbers and maps and charts. And so what's the bottom line? Well, remember those job postings I was telling you about? Well, of the last year, 63% of them, and this is in Georgia, 63% of them required at least a bachelor's degree. All right? Now, looking at the adult population in Georgia, 28 of them have bachelor's degrees. Do I need to go any further about what this means? We need that alignment because there are old economy jobs out there. We just need to better align ourselves, align our resources for those jobs. Now, these are two maps, and again, I'm focused on the Atlanta region. If you look at the two maps for a little bit, they look kind of the same, right? I'm not going to put up two the same map. That would be silly. So one of them is the third grade exceed rate, where the blues represent the highest exceed rate. All right? The other one is the economic disadvantage rate, where the blues represent the lowest economic disadvantage. You see how similar these maps are? It's scary. Socioeconomics matter. See, I told you I was going to say that again. But they do, especially for third grade reading. It's the same for eighth grade math. It's the same for graduation rates. It's even the same for attendance. So the context outside of the classroom matters a lot for the context inside the classroom. See, I told you I was going to keep saying this. Socioeconomics matter. If you look at the achievement gap of the percent exceeding third grade reading compared to the disadvantaged and advantaged, is a 38% achievement gap. And this is just in metropolitan Atlanta, the Atlanta region. So socioeconomics matter. See, socioeconomics matter. Here, the reds, see, I told you that I was going to confuse you with the colors. So here, the reds actually represent household income by high school attendance zone. Okay? So you'll see the wealthiest areas up here. And the white dots are those with the highest graduation rates. You'll see a lot of white dots on red areas. So again, socioeconomics matters. This two charts looking at, again, just some districts locally. Percent exceeding third grade, percent not economically disadvantaged. Decatur, Fayette, Cherokee, Cobb, Fulton. It's almost like I didn't need the other chart. And then finally, I haven't really even mentioned this, and I just want to leave this, and this is the last slide, so y'all actually did fine. You made it through. Just to remind you that there's other factors at play. Health matters a lot too, and as a matter of fact, sometimes student achievement is actually determined before you're born. So this is looking at levels of prematurity and how that same kid, 5-6 years later, did on the first grade test, back when we had the first grade test. And you'll see as the levels of prematurity decline, kids do better. Health matters, and there's a whole bunch of other things that matter. And so I just wanted to thank the partnership for inviting me here. Thank you for putting up with the data presentation. And I think we have...
How about a round of applause for Mike? Mike is in the incoming class of our fellows and was kind enough to squeeze his schedule today to come do this for us. He's going to have to hustle out to another meeting, so we're going to do a few minutes for Q&A just for him. We'll do Q&A for the panel later, but we'll take a few questions if you have any burning questions for Mike before he has to leave.
Yes, ma'am.
I just have a question. If you've ever done data on the amount of money spent per child, and then high school system, and then how that translates to the progress?
I haven't looked at that data's messy to get a hold of. So the question was if I'd looked at, per pupil's expenditure and then comparing that to student achievement. I haven't looked at that yet. That data's kind of messy to get a hold of. And Title I kind of factors into that. And so no, I haven't done that. It would be interesting to look at. My gut feeling is it probably isn't going to show much. I think it will be, or it can be.
The whole program
Absolutely.
will be on our website by Friday, if not by Monday. But treat yourself and go on their website and play with the Neighborhood Nexus. It's really, you can do a lot of this in your community.
Yes.
Mike, I suspect that the burning glass data you're using with respect to OSINTs, job postings, for the requirements of bachelor's degree, is actually an employer artifice that is a plug because they don't want to get 3,000 applications for a job. They want to narrow it down to 300 so that they're using the bachelor's degree, even though those skill sets don't necessarily relate to the job. They just want to narrow the applicant pool. And there's some assumption among employers that the bachelor's degree means something beyond what it might really mean in terms of the capability of an applicant to fulfill the responsibilities of the position. You got a sense of that?
Yes. Thank you, Mike Gerber. Mike Gerber's been in a lot of these same conversations that we've had with employers, and we've heard that bachelor's degree is kind of a proxy for kind of the soft skills, kind of like the communication skills. Because if you're an employer and you need a software developer and they're talking some sort of, Java scripting language, do you really know what they're talking about? So yes, it's a primary skill to have is these writing and communication skills. And employers are being a little bit lazy and to say, okay, well, we need a bachelor's degree. And honestly, you don't need a bachelor's degree to code. You don't need a bachelor's degree to learn Java scripting. But the employers are using that bachelor's degree as a cop-out to make sure that they get these type of communication and writing skills. And that's that kind of that alignment that we need out there. We need the technical colleges to step up and assure us that they're graduating students who can communicate, and we also need employers to realize that they don't need a person with a bachelor's degree to do some coding.
Mike, I'm thinking back on the slide that you compared Georgia's job recovery with the nation's. Mm-hmm. We see that the jobs are coming back, but the income is still waiting. Right. Do you have an explanation for why that's not reflected in Georgia, what's going on in the nation, why our incomes are not going up as well?
Well, I mean, wow, that's a complicated answer. Nobody really has a good answer to that. In Georgia, we're a low cost of living place. So we can get away with paying lower wages than most of the nation. So that probably has something to do with it. But it's also, I just think it's something kind of in the meta that we haven't quite picked out yet. The structure of the jobs, where the economy is going. You have metropolitan Atlanta that has very, very different requirements for its workforce than the rest of Georgia does. So you have that dichotomy. I think there's a number of factors that are going into that, and I don't have a good answer for you. I can just have some theories.
Appreciate it. Round of applause for Mike again. Please.
Thank you.
Does that give you a wow? I mean, that's kind of a wow. He calls it a bucket of data, but it really is impressive. I'm sitting there thinking, what is the year 2028? That's the year of my granddaughter who's entering kindergarten this year will graduate from high school. What will high schools look like in 2028? A lot more diverse than they are now. So what? What can we do to get more kids through that education pipeline and get them to their senior year, graduate, and then be prepared to go on to something else? So let's hear from some people who are doing a good job with that. Dana, would you and the panel members please come on up? As they're coming up, I'll remind you again, we'll have some more Q&A at the end of this, but you will hear from these people what they're doing with their respective roles in their communities. Craig was mentioning about mayors and city council. It reminds me, I saw Brian Wallace here with the Georgia Municipal Association. Many of you have heard our Economics of Education presentation where we hammer this piece about poverty and reading and the pipeline pretty hard. GMA has asked us to do a 3-hour course on that, which we've done now for mayors and city council people across the state. The more people who can hear this kind of information can finally get back to, okay, what are the root causes of these issues in our community and what can we do about it? So I'll now turn it over to Dr. Dana Rickman, who will engage our panel. Dana?
Thank you, Steve, very much. And I'm just checking, you all can hear me? No? Sound? Okay.
Your son.
Let's see. Can you all hear me now? Sally? No? How about if I just do this?
All right.
All right.
Yeah.
I had a whole introductory paragraph to set up this panel, but I think we're set up, so I'm going to skip that. And I'm just going to dive right into it. And I want to open the first question to Dr. Lanoue. All that we've heard about this startling data and where we are today in Georgia, what are you seeing in Clarke County? What challenges are you looking at, and how are you thinking about addressing them?
Sure. Probably a half-day conversation, but let me just start out with this. I think people are familiar with Clarke County, Athens, Georgia. Probably go to games. Sounds nice, right? Nice community, and it's a great community. But maybe what you didn't know is that Clarke County is the 3rd most impoverished county per capita in the country. You don't see that. So part of it in this whole conversation might come down to what do you see and what do you don't see. And this is the part that you would not see. And I want to preface it because we have just great kids and great families. They just come to us with some pretty great challenges, probably challenges that most of us didn't have in our own lives. So yeah, we're 82% minority. We are 84% free and reduced hot lunch. We have about out of 13,000 students, we have 500 homeless families. And just recently see the statistics, we double the state average in DFACS referrals and children taken from their homes. So that's kind of the lay of the land. And our performance indicators weren't real strong. Graduation rate for Clarke County in 2004 was about, I think it was about 40% for African Americans. So, you know, do the math. So the trends that we're seeing that people don't know is that we are seeing an increase in poverty, children, families in poverty, and a lot of it is working poor. Doesn't mean that they aren't working. People want to think that. They're working, but it's working poor. We're also seeing something you can see out there is a large transient rate. And I think that conversation has not occurred, I think, with the level of focus that it needs to be. What does that mean for us? We have 13,000 students. Our transient rate is 18.2%. So I just did it last week. 2,600 students go in and out during the course of a year, and another 800 move around, and another 100 or 2 move around 2 or 3 times. So this is how I would probably put it to those. Imagine if you got an email as an adult on Friday, they said, by the way, we're changing your job location. You're going to go to a whole nother business or a whole nother school, or I'm going to move a teacher to another building on Monday, and how would you feel about that? So now think about an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old doing that. So those are that's the background. And real quickly, what are we doing about it? First of all, I'll just say from my own piece, just when you think you got it, you don't got it. So, you know, it's always a work in progress, which really pushes the envelope for schools and communities to work together, but also to be very nimble. You got to change quickly. And I think that's something that we don't talk about, that you really got to be pretty mobile within your system. And so what we've done is really change the whole way of thinking, and this is what I think we have to do on the state. We have to stop mandating, start building. We have to form collaborations where before we're blaming each other. We didn't move as a community because we were all blaming each other what you didn't do. And I hate to say it, usually schools got most of the blame. But until you stop blaming each other and start really honestly looking at the comprehensive nature of what you have to do for your community, it's not going to change. And so therefore, we've even gone as far as
We're trying to build our communities. We aren't basing our school district on choice, because what I've said to our community, our schools are the epicenter of your community, and if it doesn't work, fix it. We got to fix it. We got to step up and do what's right. But I'm not going to move you out and then start having spots in our community that are dysfunctional, because it grows and it grows and it grows. And so for us, it's really multifaceted and it changes, and the job piece is really important. We ask different kind of questions, and I would say right now when people say go to college or not, I say it's absolutely the wrong question. Stop asking it. Because most of the people that want that question to be asked, when you ask them, what did your kids do? They say they went to college. But they would say not everyone's ready for college. Our kids have to learn once they leave high school. They have to, and they have to position themselves to be choices, and whatever that may be is what we ought to be focusing on. And if that's college or post-secondary, that's what it should be. But in kids in heavy poverty and transients, you just ask them what their picture is of work, what their picture is of a job. Remember, we've had groups of people that have been marginalized for many years. And those adults still feel marginalized and can't express what it's like to move into that job market. And so what we've tried to do is to change the picture. You got Great Promise Partnership, which is here. We did a career academy. Of course, SB 132 has changed that. But what we said, we have to take kids to a place they never thought they can be. So if adults can't take the risk with them, then who else will? So that's what we do. And the last piece I'll say, because I want to consume time, is we've really moved away from really chasing some of the core area test scores. I mean, there's kind of a mismatch here when you talk about the skill set you want in jobs and actually what we're assessing kids. It's really just, I mean, it's if you want communication, you want team building, you want problem solving, we're not really getting that the way we want. But we decided to change our focus away from the math, science, social studies, English, not because that's not important, it's incredibly important. But we moved into creativity and innovation. We moved into digital learning. All of our kids have digital devices, and we changed the way we teach so we can access learning 24/7. I heard something the other day that I think is the most amazing thing about those that are really questioning about technology, is that the exponential growth of technology is making what at once was scarce abundant. So technology access is making what was scarce abundant. So now our kids have resources in an abundancy where they didn't have before. So we're just doing a lot of different things each year, but really it's about making our schools dedicated to our children, taking them to a place they never thought they'd be. We focus a lot on instructional practice. We bring clarity to what teaching looks like. We have conversation about what that looks like. Our focus areas are collaborative planning. And we also monitor a lot of self-monitoring. And so therefore something, you never know, it's fragile. I just want you to know, if you got schools of high poverty, it just remains fragile. And that's just life you live.
Thank you for...
That was long, sorry.
Thank you for... Your mic seems to be working very well.
Yeah,
Thank you for setting that context. Laurie, I want to go to you next, and Dr. Lanoue did a great job of really talking about the community and that it takes all of us together looking at this. You can't just say, school system, fix this. And I know that Great Promise Partnership has been involved with Clarke County, but all over the state too. But also what he mentioned is the graduation rates for a lot of these subpopulations are not at our state average. We're at about 73%. We're going in the right direction. But for children living in poverty, for English language learners, those graduation rates are significantly lower. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about what Great Promise Partnership is doing to try and engage those kids and close that gap.
Sure. Can y'all hear me? Since I know Dana's having troubles with her mic. Promise Partnership is a public-private partnership within local communities across the state that brings together schools and employers to help increase graduation rates. So it is based off of the Southwire 12 for Life model. That's where we got our best practices from. But the reality is not every community has a 12 for Life. 12 for Life, Southwire invested a couple of $1 million to get their programs started. They had those resources, they could do that. Not every community has an employer like that that can do that for their local school system. So we looked for ways where we could engage employers that were in the community to directly partner with their schools to help increase graduation rates. And so we do that through looking for local employers that are willing to hire students that are not on track to graduate, so students that are academically deemed deficient, they don't have enough credits, they have poor attendance, hire them part-time and provide a mentor and then life skills to help them graduate. And so our students do have to be economically disadvantaged. Our one hard and fast requirement for our students is that they have to be eligible for free and reduced lunch. And so in some of our school systems, that's a large portion of the population. We partner with graduation coaches and counselors and teachers in our schools to identify students that have family or personal challenges that are really a barrier to having them graduate from high school. And so that might be foster care or homelessness, or caring for siblings or parents, or just coming from a very poverty-stricken household. But they need some extra support to get that high school diploma. And so we are in about 28 different counties across this state. I'm really glad we have Dr. Lanoue here today, because it's one of our most vibrant programs in Clarke County. We started working with Athens Technical College about 3 years ago, looking for employers in Athens that would be willing to hire students that had the stigma of being at risk. And we worked with a manufacturing roundtable at Athens Tech, and we had 4 employers that stepped up. And they said, you know, we don't have a Southwire here in Athens, but we have 4 employers that are really willing to invest in the local community to help these students. And so 3 of those employers committed to hiring students. Those were Caterpillar, Carrier Transicold, and Power Partners, all manufacturers. We had a 4th manufacturer, Naramco, which is a Johnson & Johnson affiliate, that could not hire students that were younger than 18 because of the nature of their work. And so they've provided financial support. And we've now added a 5th employer, Eaton Supercharger, another manufacturer in the Athens area, is coming on. And so these manufacturers have hired our students. Here, starting off in the fall of 2015, we have 30 students that are currently working, and they are working in real jobs. These are not made-up jobs or internships. These are true jobs at these employers, and we're looking to be at 60 later this year. So it's really growing fast, and the reality is these companies are supporting these students. They're getting a paycheck, they're having a mentor, they're getting life skills, and these students have some severe barriers in front of them, and the support they're getting from these companies, in addition to the support they're getting from their administrators and teachers and graduation coaches at their school, are helping them to graduate. And just to, you know, kind of show some of the families these students are coming from, we had an open house at Power Partners that hired 15 students at the end of May, so they've been working since May. And one of the parents asked how much their son or daughter would be making working at Power Partners. And they were told, our students make above minimum wage in Athens. So these particular group of students were going to make $8.25 an hour. And the mother commented, "That's more than I make." And she wasn't sad. She was very happy. You know, she was excited that her child had the opportunity to earn paycheck that will help the family and also help to break that cycle of poverty. And so she was excited that her child had a better future ahead than she had had. So,
can I just comment on, just because I was there and I walked with those kids. But the first time we did it, I was walking with a young man. And as we went into Power Partners, into the plant, kind of looked out onto the floor. And I think manufacturing is much different than maybe what I thought it was. I mean, it really is an incredible industry. But he just looked out, he made a comment. He said, "Hey, doctor," and I go, "What?" He said, "I never thought I could work here." 17. The other part that's about it is that, we're talking about collaboration, is that the business industry said, we got to be part of the solution. We can't just say, "You're not giving us the right people." And even Naramco said, "We'll add something financially, even though we can't hire them, because building a workforce in the community was a priority." It's a big difference.
So, Dr. Dunning, based on, that was an example of what's going on in Clarke County. You're down in Albany, Doherty County, and clearly these demographic shifts, especially the poverty concern, is real for you all down there. What's been a recent strategy undertaken by your community leaders to address these issues?
I'll mention a couple of things, but as I noticed Mike's slides this morning, I lived in Gwinnett for about 13 years and Cobb County about 10 years, 2 affluent counties in Georgia, and now I'm in one of the least affluent in Doherty County. And I'm intrigued by what poverty does, not just to students, but what it does to a community. And one of the things that I noticed when I arrived in Albany is sort of the polarization of institutions post-secondary, whether it's the tech school, Albany State or Darden College, or the school system. I did not notice enough conversation happening. And it's very clear to me, looking at those numbers this morning, unless we collaborate and leverage resources, this problem can't be solved. And we have one of the heaviest concentration of minority students in the state. Albany is about 2/3 African American. And what we have been trying to do is change the sort of cultural narrative about how people describe the community, who we are, and what we think about. And one of the things that I've been pushing hard in this position as we brought the 4 entities together, K-12 schools, Darden, Albany State, and Albany Tech, is that minority is not a synonym for deficit. And trying to get people to understand there are generic skills that can be learned to enter the workforce, and how do we begin to get this narrative so clear in this conversation, in our policies, in our practices, in how we discuss and describe the community. So this collaborative has been able to bring about 400 people in the community together. We asked the Carl Vinson Institute of Government at UGA and the Fanning Institute to do listening sessions. What we were attempting to do is make sure there's no hierarchical conversation, that the 4 leaders will tell this community what needs to be done, but it will be a top-down, bottom-up converging of discussions. And we spent a lot of sessions all across Albany, and what people saw, one of the most unintended consequences was the institutions talking. One person said, I've been in this community 30 years, I've never seen these 4 people together in the same room. That describes in many ways, if you're not part of some communities, I'm in a community where people have long memories. They remember a lot of things. We love our stories, and whether it's the Civil War or civil rights, we remember those things. And so that brings to the table sort of the undercurrent that's always in the room as you're trying to address these issues that Mike talked about. The other thing that we did that I thought is helpful, we went to Greenville-Spartanburg. Some of you may know this story, but BMW, 25 or 30 years ago, they decided they were not going to be a mill town that's dying. And so you drive up through Greenville-Spartanburg, you see. And so they came together, business, education, and government, and said, let's redefine, let's recraft who we are. And we also talked to the people at the University of Texas, El Paso, which is right across the border from Juarez. They have a heavy Hispanic population. So we were looking at these places, and we also included Winston-Salem, where they have tried to address their changing demographics. These demographics are what they are, and they're going to be more profound if you look at what Mike is talking about. So we're in a place where the leaders in the organizations in Albany, Georgia, came together with these listening sessions. So we now have a set of recommendations that we'll be looking at doing something similar to the partnership, is to hire someone and to get a broader group of people at the table. We now have the 4 leaders, but we're going to add, we hope, 2 or 3 business people, county and city government, who will serve as an executive committee to implement and execute these recommendations that came from the community about what needs to be done. And lastly, the biggest issue facing us is intergenerational poverty, and how to teach kids and raise aspirations and expectations. And at the beginning of life, that we begin to look at what happens to children. And if you wait until the 8th and 9th grade, I don't think we'll solve this. And higher education's role is to reach down and create articulation agreements with the school system, whether it's dual enrollment, and also with the 2-year college, make it easier for students, take the mystery out of what it means to move through the process. And so that's a little bit of the context of where we are, but what I'm finding, and I'm enjoying this job more than any job I've had, is because we can see so much value added by small things that we do. And so I think we're on the right track.
Laurie, I want to come back to you for a minute. And in your last answer you were talking about the impact in a community of like a Southwire. And even in Athens, Clarke County, you had a couple of manufacturers that they were able to bring together. And so we're talking about areas that have a certain level of population. What can be done for rural Georgia, where there's really not industry, there's not a lot of economic development going on? Are there models out there that Great Promise Partnership could help replicate to really get students graduated and into higher ed, or maybe even work ready right away and sort of grow their own labor force?
Yeah, so we also work in rural communities, and we use a different model. But the reality is, whether an employer can hire 20 kids or one child, they can still contribute to their schools and to their communities. And so what we've done in some of the more rural areas, for example, in Emmanuel County and Swainsboro, we have 7 small employers that are coming together as a community response to hire students. They're not able to hire 20 students, which is what the commitment that Power Partners has made in Athens, but they have been able to hire some students out of the community to provide them the opportunity to get on the job skills and earn that paycheck. Another thing we've done is partnered with organizations that are already working hard in communities. And so there are a lot of wonderful organizations that are doing great work across the state, preparing students with the skills they'll need on the job, even if they're not actually working. And so we've partnered with 4-H, communities and schools, Boys and Girls Clubs, Jobs for Georgia Graduates, Georgia Best, across the state to help increase their reach and open up opportunities and access to students that maybe weren't having that ability to participate before. And so the reality is, a lot of times we start to think about getting work ready when a student turns 16, when they can actually start working. But we have to start much earlier, and we can do that through youth development organizations. We can do that through hands-on curriculum, partnerships with technical schools, partnerships with employers that are allowing students to come and see what it's like in their workplace, or see that they can work at an employer that maybe they thought wasn't attainable for them. And so it's really about looking at the assets a community has instead of looking at the deficits. So instead of saying, we don't have a manufacturer, we can't do that, we don't have a large employer, what does the community have that they can pull together and work with and partner to provide opportunities for their students? And a lot of times there are a lot of opportunities through different organizations if they come together with local government, with the school system, to work with students to provide them with the opportunity to gain these skills.
Dr. Dunning, I want to come back to you for a moment. And most of our conversation today has really been focused on K-12 and how do we get our students, when they graduate from high school, they're ready for the rigors of college or work and planning for the future. I want to shift a bit to looking at higher ed specifically. And so you have 3 higher ed institutions in your neighborhood. How have these demographic shifts impacted higher ed from your standpoint?
I think in 2 ways. One, we've looked at structure. We have been very aggressive in helping students be able to navigate from the tech school to Albany State or from the tech school to Darden College. So one is creating an infrastructure of transfer relationships, articulation agreements. And I don't think anybody would be surprised how people are mystified by trying to navigate through some of the changes that are necessary just to move from high school to a 2-year college to a state university. So one, we create articulation agreements. We've had a lot of huge symbolism in the community by having press conferences and signing these agreements, and also being able to use the media to talk about what this means. And so higher education has tried to create an integrated strategy out in Albany from a post-secondary standpoint so that all communities out there would understand how to navigate. The second thing is beginning to reach down with dual enrollment and career academy. And it was passed, I think, on Monday night in Albany, where students now can have the choice of a career academy where they're ready to go to work or ready to go to college. And so it's not a sort of dichotomous situation that you have to be pressed into something, but you have the ability to make that choice. And so not staying isolated from the conversation of K-12 and reaching down with agreements and relationships that make a difference. The other thing that we've looked at is we have on these campuses and universities a rich resource of faculty. And we've been trying to look at ways to give a system of incentives for faculty members to be involved in the community and use their social capital to do some things other than teach their classes. One of the things we're looking at is a Saturday Academy. And there have been some very good successes around the nation where people who are part of a group that's, as we talked about this morning, very poor, but putting uniforms, whether it's khaki pants or shirts, public speaking, STEM disciplines, understanding words, Latin, where we raise the expectations and take away what many people feel when they go into schools with this sort of economic stratification. And so we've been trying to get our faculty members to begin to think about, if you've studied economics at the highest level in some of the best universities around the nation, in addition to teaching your class and taking care of your responsibility and looking at promotion and tenure, how do you use your social capital in the community on weekends and evenings in a community such as ours? And we've been getting a lot of strong responses to that. And so this whole idea of a Saturday Academy where kids can come in and normalize what I consider normalized high expectations. And if you have a community where the dropout rate is high, poverty is very high, and we are listed in many publications as one of the poorest cities in the nation. So that's an issue we have to address, is the normalization of high expectations. How do you do that when people are really being pushed in so many ways with scarcity and lack of resources, and what that does either through the ability to consume and to buy, and to what it does to your spirit. And so we've been trying to think of ways where universities can reach down to do that as well. And I think what I'm pleased about is we're getting a number of people who are very aggressive in saying, I'm interested in this.
Dr. Lanoue, you've been nodding a lot as he's been talking about what's been going on with higher ed. Is there something you wanted to add?
Well, I think so. I think for too long, our post-secondary institutions in K-12, I call it, haven't shared space well. You know, we sort of join each other and talk to each other, but we don't share space. And for us, we made that decision about 6 years ago. So right now we have 7 professors in residence, in which we are really trying to connect practice and research. By the way, it's bilateral, it goes both ways, because we have to learn from each other. And it's forging those relationships and resources. Like Experience UGA will be on our 3rd year. Our goal was to bring 13,000 students every year to the University of Georgia for an educational field trip, sponsored by one of their departments. We have had students that live in Athens and never set foot on that campus, nor did they believe they could ever go there. But right now, last year, we got to 9,752 students were bussed in and spent a half a day or more with one of the departments about the university and what they do, from biology to leadership to engineering.
And my last question that I want to address to each of you, in the broader context, you know, the Georgia Partnership looks at statewide policy a lot, and so I want to sort of pose that question to you all today. These demographic trends that affect local schools obviously have wide implications for public policy, raising questions that really can't be answered by the school system alone. Mike pointed out a lot of that: health, for example, income inequality, equity in general. What are some of those issues that we as a statewide audience need to be thinking about, that you think need to be raised, that you're just not hearing in the discussion yet? And I'll start with you and then go on down.
Sure. Well, first of all, it opens, at least for us, a whole piece about testing, and there's lots of conversations going on about that. But let me just say here publicly, our kids are not a test number. They're much more. And we have to figure that out. That I think as policymakers, we have to move from it. You aren't going to level the social inequities in this state on a test score. It's a comprehensive view that we have to look at, and we have to talk about them collectively as one. So I think as policymakers, as we move forward, we probably have to build it, and we have to build it together through policies that overlap, get people out of their silos, and really force people to work together to have the right conversations about change than not.
I know earlier transportation was mentioned as an issue here in Metro Atlanta, but in rural Georgia, it's the opposite. There isn't congestion. There's not any way to get around unless you have your own vehicle. And so, you know, when you think about getting people to work and having a viable workforce, and especially getting students work experiences, we have to get them there somehow. And many of them don't have that opportunity because transportation is such a challenge. And so a lot of times the transportation conversation, you know, the congestion in Metro Atlanta and talking about how to get our materials from the ports to the airport kind of dominates that conversation. But I think we need to remember there's also a flip side of that transportation challenge in our rural communities. And kind of go along with Mike said earlier about the health of our communities and other factors. I mean, our students are dealing with a lot of challenges, and we have to have healthy, vibrant communities that can support them. And a lot of them are dealing with fragmented services across the board, whether it's from the government or from school or from the private industry. And so thinking about how we can help students navigate those challenges.
And Dr. Dunning?
I think what we're doing this morning is to create conversations where some of the hardest issues facing us as a state, that we have some kind of space to talk about that. And how do we take that time and move from discussion to action? And one of the things that troubles me the most is how we can, in some of our communities, there's so much work to be done. We have to have all of these units working together like we talked about earlier in Albany, and normalize that, put the processes in place, and sustain it, because this is intergenerational work. Mm-hmm. So how do you have some urgency about it, but have patience for results? And we are a country that's been very urgent in getting a lot of great things done the last couple of 100 years. And so this is not going to be solved overnight. And so how can you put these processes in place and have the partnership and others facilitating and creating these conditions for us to have these conversations, and then leave here with some action? The thing that I've enjoyed the most about our work in Albany is the relationship with K-12 schools and the relationship with the two-year college and Albany Tech. We have never done that before. And I'm astonished at times how much we can get done just by being in the same room and the people who can make decisions about what's best for this community. That may sound simple, but it's hard to pull off in many of our communities. So this whole idea of conversations moving to action, I think, is going to be one. And then lastly, making sure we give attention to our policies. What sort of policy framework do we have? And are those policies giving us the outcomes that they are intended to give us? And so some really assessment of that. And I think if we can continue to do that, I'm optimistic about what's going on. Even in looking at some of the numbers up here, it's going to take a lot of smart, highly educated, highly skilled people to make this state work. And with the demographics that we see coming down the line, we don't have a choice. It's our destiny. There's just no question about that. And so it's going to be up to us to make this work if we want this state to continue to thrive and prosper.
Well, thank you very much, and I want to take a moment to thank each of our panelists for, first of all the great work that you are all doing in your communities and offering great models and things that we can do for the rest of the state. And also thank you for taking time out of that work to come and tell us about it. And so now I'd like to open up the discussion to the audience. We have microphones circulating, so if you raise your hand, you'll be tapped.
What runs through your minds when you think about the governor's idea of creating opportunities school districts?
Sure. All right, I'll lead off. Sure. Because I have not been a supporter of the Opportunity School District. And I'm not saying here that schools have it right either, because we haven't been that accountable. But I do believe still in democracy, and I still believe in the democratic principles that communities have. And I think there are ways that we can work in a more collaborative spirit that's going to get more done. And it really, to me, starts with a district strategic plan and really what you want for outcomes, because probably across the state, I would imagine that not all districts are having the right conversations. So why don't we start by having really put our districts in position to have the right conversations with a strategic plan? Because here's what I say. If you have something in a strategic plan, just draw a line to that student in the chair. And if it doesn't impact that student, that's the adults. And the bigger piece is what we're talking about here is not a student problem, it's an adult problem. And so if the adults can't get it right, how do we expect students to get it right? So why don't we start getting it right?
Other questions? I don't really have that many thoughts on it. In my role, we work with school districts with the policies and systems that they have in place. And so I think, working with the youth development organization, we work around the particular unique aspects of every community. And so all of our programs look different everywhere. And so we will work with all of our schools regardless of what kind of systems they have in place.
Ditto. I'll defer to my colleagues on that.
Help. Wait.
Yeah, my question is, how do you address the concept or the idea of so many people that, well, these kids, all they got to do is just go to school and learn. They don't understand the connection between, the data and the concepts that y'all have talked about. I hear it all the time. I'm running for office, so of course I hear this stuff daily. Well, all they got to do is just go to school. If they really want to do it, they can do it. And how do you address that? How do we answer that?
All right, since I'll lead off, group. First of all, I think we have to be transparent, at least we are, about what the issues are. And they're not trying to be excuses, they're just realities and they're challenges that we have to overcome. But I think some of the part about the conversation, I'll say it's probably a little harder to really convince my generation. I'm older. Because I have a pretty set way of what learning looks like. So I think the part is you got to have the conversation with that group up there, the millennials or the next generation, because they want some things differently. And so it's probably going to even permeate into the fact is that school isn't going to have the only place where you learn. I think with digital tools, it is going to be a 24/7 access. And I think as we morph into the future, that whole concept of even K-12, tech versus bachelor's degree, I think all that's going to change. It's changing now with SB 132, and if you didn't know what that is, that means that any student at this point, actually by law, when they become a freshman or ninth grader, could actually go into a technical college, get 2 tech certificates in a field or a tech diploma or an associate's degree, and they will automatically get their diploma. So we've already set the stage that things are changing, and I think probably rather than talking about, the problems of just going to school, we probably at the same time need to redefine what that is.
I think it's about continuing to educate supporters about the challenges that schools and students face. One of the things our program does is the education goes both ways. Yes, our students are getting educated. Yes, they're gaining on-the-job skills, but our employers are learning about what their lives are like, and they deal with those challenges daily now. And many of them have not been in a school since they were a high schooler, and many of them are middle and upper incomes, and so they don't see the challenges that some of their children's classmates have. And so when our students come in and they are facing some of these challenges, they learn about, it's not just about going to school and being educated. Another part of that, too, is helping our students be advocates for themselves. And so showing them, what they can do to help themselves, how they can ask for help, and reaching out and being advocates for themselves.
And one of the things that people have said to me is that this is an American experiment, free public education. How can you not learn in a country that provides free public education? And that's in response to what you're saying, is that when you look at the numbers of poverty, the disengagement that many times people in families without resources often experience, or the mothers are younger, and sometimes they are alone. And so this complete disintegration of what I call a social system of support for children has changed dramatically, and kids are coming to school, as we've heard, free and reduced lunches. Some are hungry. And so you have this whole social infrastructure that has changed in the last so many years, where this concept of living simply and thinking highly, that is deferred gratification, that we will put off things so our children can get more. And some people said the reverse of that now is live highly and think simply. And so you have just a complete turnaround, whether it's teen pregnancy, whether it's poverty, whether it's disintegration of the family, the social support that's needed. All of these things now they've changed the nature of schooling. The majority of our students, college students at Albany State, come from families making less than $25,000 a year. So our students come in and they get loans. And they leave with loans that stagger me. And I went to school on the GI Bill, having gone in service to East Asia. I went to the University of Alabama. And I got 3 degrees, and all I owed was $1,400 after those 3 degrees. We now have students getting bachelor's degrees owing $20,000 to $25,000. And how they will pay this off, I have no idea, because many are going into disciplines and going into jobs where it's going to take a long time. That changes the nature of how you're going to live your life. So we have students who come through the process and have had a hard way to go to get to the point of going to college, but they come from these families. And sometimes families are looking to students for support. Some of the students will work. And so you have this sort of twisting of that. And then how do you take all of this and explain that to people who are in leadership roles to say this is what our young people and many are bringing to this process, whether it's in high school or college. So it's not just the K-12, it's college as well. And so I think the whole idea, as was described here, is continue to educate. It's not make excuses and not say we can't make it work, but let's talk about the nature of things, why this is the way it is and what it does to young people.
Yeah, let me just to give you an example for us. 49% of our families are single parent. Now, that doesn't mean single parents. We have great single parents, but for all of us, when you had 2 parents, how hard it is. You can imagine how hard it is with 1. But I'm going to throw sort of a different little twist to this, and that is, I don't think we're going to exist with the same structures of supporting the same structures. We made a decision 3 years ago before SB 132 that our kids were going to go to college. We're going to pay for it at age 16. Partnered with Athens Tech. All they had to do is pass the Compass test. People said, well, our kids can't do it. It's a 10th grade test. Yes, they can. And we leveraged that resource differently. So it was better in the long run. It wasn't like I was adding money. We just leveraged resources differently. But just to give you an example, 3 years ago, the number of dual enrollment credits, and I might be off a couple, in Clarke County, I think was 84. 13.5 went to our African-American students and probably 8 to our Hispanic students. Last year, we gave 371 credits, and 191 went to our African-American students and about 50 to our Hispanic, and it fluctuated just a little bit this past year. But what that means is changing the structures to change the mindset, and I think we're going to have to do that more in the future here.
We've heard a lot about the students and the parents and the business and the community, but I haven't heard anything about teachers. And I know that we put a lot of responsibility on our teachers. Some of that is probably unfounded in terms of where the responsibility lies. But I've heard that there's a lot of disappointment or weakness in the quality of teachers that our places of higher learning are turning the teachers out. And I'm just wondering if any of you have any insight as to the quality of the teachers that our places of higher learning are turning out in Georgia.
Well, I'll certainly start just because we have 500 young adults in our district every day. So, but what we did is we changed the model of preparation more to a clinical model. But let me just start with this whole concept that people say good teachers, bad teachers, effective, ineffective. How do you determine that? And so what I've said in our district, let's have great clarity about what good instruction looks like. And I think for too long we've made decisions about what good teachers are not. I had a great teacher, yeah, but 30% of the kids in their class failed. I mean, so here's a statistic, here's an equation I think is really important. If you're teaching, someone has to be learning. And we've called teaching way too long when it wasn't. I mean, that's fact, I think. And I've been around a long time. But I think we have to really begin to work with our teachers and our organizations to more clearly define what that looks like. But I would say this, I mean, there's lots for teachers, but I think in education we have to start from one premise, that if you can walk into my classroom, I can get it done. Now, I know there's a lot of factors out there, and I know, but the starting point to me about teaching is about inspiring people for what they're passionate about, inspiring people to be to a different place. And so I think we have to be careful that that inspiration combined with technique is really important. I think there is a disparity across the state and across the nation on teacher preparation, but I think that's a joint venture between the public schools and the universities and colleges.
The inspiration piece is something I've thought a lot about since I've been in Albany as we look at teachers in the school system. And it made me reflect a lot on my high school years and about teachers that I consider master teachers. Didn't know what that term meant at the time. But I had a couple of teachers who almost had us running into the classroom to see what they were going to say. One was a man who was a World War II veteran and taught history. But he made the subject come alive. He had no resources to speak of, and this was during a period in time in the state of Alabama where scarcity was the norm. But somehow this man had the ability to inspire it. And so as we begin to train teachers, I think we're spending a lot of time on the techniques and the practices and the clinical experiences and the academic classes. I don't quite know how we get at this piece that I'm just describing for you. It's people who love their subject, who love children, can inspire you to have hope and to understand a subject matter. And some of this subject was very complex. And there was nothing in the environment that I was living in at the time that suggested that we ought to be as excited about math, science, and English. And he also did it with young men. Most of the people in my high school were men, World War II veterans who came back on the GI Bill and went to colleges of education and came back to teach in the schools. So we had a lot of men in front of boys. And that was an experience that I think made a difference in my life. And so as you begin to think about teachers in Georgia now, how do we begin to get at this notion that it's not just the teaching and the knowledge and the practice, but this notion of inspiration? That's harder to tackle. I think we have a lot of checkpoints for colleges of education now to look at are the right people in the classroom from a knowledge standpoint. But do you like what you do, and do you do it well, and can you inspire others? And I think that's going to be the difference.
And I think also it is the role of the teacher has changed dramatically. Not just because of what they have to do with children, but we're out of the knowledge stage. And so what we've tried to work with, that the role of teachers really, I'm not sure if this is correct, but teachers, students, and content interact to produce new content. And if you're not problem solving, I mean, that's the part. And so how do you begin to construct classrooms? And I think the digital tools are going to open that door across the state, because I think it can help close the achievement gap. But it's only if teachers are teaching and thinking differently, and that we also have the right metrics to assess that. But that's really the new age. I mean, we're working with students now on really doing proficiency based on practice, where we want kids to actually go get help. The more hints you get to solve the problem, the better you are. Because in my day, if I had to get a hint, I didn't study hard enough. Well, there's too much knowledge out there. So it's also changing, and our universities and colleges have to change with that. I think it's been slow, but I think in the last 4 or 5 years, by our collaborative working together, that we push the envelope. But it only is how hard the school did. They both have to want to push. Someone's got to be in that relationship to be able to push that envelope. Otherwise, you're going to be pretty static.
Okay, we'll have our last question.
Dr. Lanoue, given the tremendous obstacles that you face in Clarke County, given the statistics that you shared with us, how do you change the conversation from we can't do this because of all of these negative factors that we face to this is why we must do this to overcome these negative factors?
Yeah, it's a really good one. Starts with the top, probably. First of all, you have to create a performance culture. So you have to then, when people say, oh, all kids could learn at a high level. I mean, but then you ask, what do you do to make that happen? You don't do anything. So we started with culture that was about discipline, about all those issues. And basically, from the top, I don't want to hear it. I really don't want to hear it. So until you start talking about a performance culture, do you know what I mean? And all those become subsets to solve, then you're not going to get there. So for us, that's part of, I live and breathe our vision and mission. I'll tell you one thing we did right off, it starts with our school leaders, put our beliefs up. I say, get all the practices that support our beliefs and list all the practices we do that don't. We took the list we don't, said they're gone by Friday. Because you have to really live up to that, to that belief structure in your own actions. And that really starts pervasively into that culture. But you're right, if someone says, well, I don't care. Because there's two questions that we ask our district committee that sorts it out. First question is, who do you see that first day of school? Yesterday, on our first day. Who do you see in your classroom? And the second day is, what aspirations do you have for them? And if they differ because of the way they look, seriously, you can go to another district. Plain and simple. But we don't. Our teachers are great. So I really, teachers. Nope.
Well, thank you very much to the audience for some really great questions. And again, thank you to our panel for a fascinating discussion. And I think myself and everyone really learned a lot today. And thank you to Kevin Greiner, our chair, for kicking this off. And everybody have a wonderful day. And contact us if you have questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.